Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It is so great to have you here. Welcome back to Race Talks, Interdisciplinary Virtual Colloquium Series at Texas A&M University. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, one day before spring break. So I'm Dr. Mariana Garriazzo, and today we are welcoming to the series Performance Studies scholar Dr. Leticia Robles Moreno. But before I introduce her, I would like to speak a little bit about the series and make a few new announcements. Race Talks is possible by an Advanced Climate Together grant funded by the College of Liberal Arts. Ours is truly a collaborative project between the program of African Studies, the dance program, the film studies, Latino and Mexican American studies, performance studies, and religious studies. We also have a dream team here in performance studies of staff members that really help us to put all of this together. So my gratitude extends to Myra, Darlene, and Kathy. Thank you so much for all you do. As a complement to the Race Talks, we have created a program for allowing students to present their research, and we call this project Lightning Talks. A lightning talk, briefly, is a short, to-the-point presentation. In this case, it will be video presentations. And we hope these talks will help students bring unique perspectives to an intersectional campus-wide conversation about race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, sexuality, class, ability, and faith. We invite undergraduates and graduate students to present research, consummated projects, or ideas that show potential for future research. Submissions are due on April 1st, and I'm going to try to send you here the link to learn more on our website about the Lightning Talks. So there should be in the chat. I hope you can join us for many more talks. We have a few left for the semester. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Phil Ewell also talking at 2 o'clock on Thursday. These events are open to the public, and we really enjoy having you here. Students can learn maroon-based points for attending Race Talks. This is brand new. And so you can use, let me send you the link for that too in the chat. I'm multitasking here, so I don't think I sent it in the chat. Right there. That's for the Lightning Talks, and this is for the maroon-based student application page. So please look it up, and I will send you the link in a little bit later today. So these are points that you can win and enter to win up to $2,000 in prizes. There's a lot of different events that qualify for Maroon Points, and we have been reached out to offer our programming as part of that School of Innovation enterprise. So that's great news. So now, to all joining us on this talk, I invite you to truly demonstrate the Aggie spirit that sets this community apart. Our core values of excellence, integrity, leadership, and respect inform all of our events at Race Talks, and we all are expected to demonstrate all these values during the talk today. I thought that it was important for us to acknowledge the emails sent by the Office of the President this morning, and also the events that are affecting our society this week, especially in the US. So, quoting from Dr. Annie McGowan, Interim Vice President and Associate Provost for Diversity. It is the shared responsibility of all of us to embrace and support individuals from a wide range of identities, perspectives, viewpoints, and experiences with full understanding and sensitivity. To promote a safe and inclusive Aggie community, we encourage you to report acts of hatred, discrimination, or bias toward a member of the Aggie community using the Stop Hate. The Office for Diversity also provides a toolkit of resources and self-care tips for addressing xenophobia and anti-Asian racism. So I'm going to copy those resources and what I just mentioned on the chat for anyone that would like to have access to those resources. Please make sure to do so. Good. Some instructions in how we are going to proceed today with the talk. As usual, I'm going to ask you to please stay on mute so that we can ensure best communication and recording. We will welcome your questions on the chat at any point during the conversation. And so please put your questions in the chat, and at the very end we will devote about 15 minutes or so for questions specifically brought to Dr. Robles Moreno. And now, without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker. Leticia Robles Moreno holds a PhD from New York University's Department of Performance Studies. Her research is focused on transnational collective creation processes, contemporary performance, and politics. Her book project, Becoming Collective, Relational Cartographies of Collective Resistance in the Americas, analyzes how theater, art, and activism performed especially by women can build networked practices as strategies of political survival from a combined perspective of performance studies and affect studies. As a member of the Women Mobilizing Memory Research Group at the Center for Study of Social Difference at Columbia University, she has studied Latin American Antigonas' role in post-conflict contexts. Her work has been published by the Latin American Theater Review, Contemporary Theater Review, Conjunto, Hispanic Issues Online, Hemisférica, and the TDR, the Drama Review. She is assistant professor in the Department of Theater and Dance at Muhlenberg College. And welcome so much to Race Talks and Texas A&M University, Dr. Robles Moreno.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mariana Gariazzo. And thank you for the invitation. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. There you go. So thank you, Mariana, also for sharing the email that was sent to the students this morning. Although this talk is not about anti-Asian violence, it is about solidarity. So I also cannot start without acknowledging the horrible fact that 3 days ago, this white man shoot the young Asian massage parlor, and the people killed, 8 people killed, most of them are of Asian descent and mostly women. And while this crime has been seen as another instance of a recent wave of racist attacks against Asian Americans linked to COVID-19 blaming, the fact is that there have been 3,800 anti-Asian racist incidents, mostly against women, reported in the past year. Right, so it's part of a systemic system of violence, and it's rooted in white supremacism and misogyny. So I wanted to try to think about how to choose to dig, to ask questions, to take action, and not consider that this violence as not related to our own identities. And also, it's interesting that you mentioned that so many people are joining from different places, because I think that in times of Zoom connections and social distance, it's easy to forget any references to land acknowledgement, the formal statements that recognize the unique and enduring relationship that exists between indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. And I say it's easier because it might seem that we are gathering in cyberland, right, where our digital selves are rendered into pixelated images in video and pictures, or just in names, as I see in this meeting. So this talk is not about Native American indigenousness, but it is about solidarity, as I was saying. So I choose today not to forget that almost all property in the United States stand on lands obtained through processes of violent colonization from indigenous peoples. So how to offer a land acknowledgement in a Zoom session. So I want to think about 2 land acknowledgements and also invite everybody to think where they are joining us today. So the Texas A&M a university formal land acknowledgement reads, we acknowledge that Texas A&M University, College Station, is situated on the land of multiple Native nations, past and present. These original homelands are the territory of indigenous peoples who were largely dispossessed and removed. We specifically acknowledge the traditional stewardship of this land by the Tonkawa, Tawakoni, Ueko, Sana, Wichita, and Coahuiltecan peoples. And in Pennsylvania, where my physical self is right now, the acknowledgement is we recognize and acknowledge that these properties stand on the indigenous territory known as Lenapehoking, the traditional homelands of the Lenape, also called Lenni Lenape or Delaware Indians. These are the people who, during the 1680s, negotiated with William Penn to facilitate the founding of the colony of Pennsylvania. Their descendants today include the Delaware tribe and Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape, Ramapough Lenape, Powhatan Lenape of New Jersey, and the Munsee Delaware of Ontario. Always important to acknowledge and to think about where we're coming from and from where we are going today. Also, as I was preparing this presentation, thinking about land acknowledgement, reflecting upon the brutal effects of anti-Asian racism and misogyny, or absent presences in cyberland, and my own displacement as a Peruvian immigrant in constant search of belonging, I asked myself what it means to find paths of connection instead of detachment in current struggles for social justice and for the recognition of basic human rights for all communities. I want to rehearse an approach from the lens of performance studies. If enactments of racism and misogyny within a white patriarchal system could be seen as none of my business, then perhaps turning the gaze towards enactments, performances of intersectional sorority could counteract detachments and offer possibilities for identification and belonging. Today, I want to talk about the work of two Peruvian artists who work in the intersection of art and activism, or artivism. Maricarmen Gutiérrez and Germain Machuca. Both of them put their bodies in the first lines of civil society protests, creating powerful images that both signal the vulnerability of their bodies and their potential for resistance and transformation. Both of them weave multivalent and seemingly contradictory objects to bring together different traditions and struggles to collaborate in resistance. Both of them acknowledge the marks of racialization and sexualization imprinted on their bodies, transforming them into a cipher of the trauma of thousands of bodies whose very lives are at siege. Both of them emerge from the uniqueness of their bodies to be with a multiplicity of identities to become a collective force. Both of them embody the potential force of minoritarian identities. And for minoritarian, I follow Jose Muñoz via Tabia Nyong'o. Minoritarian, different than a demographic minority, which the non-white peoples of the global majority are not. The minoritarian explores the political outside of the representation of formal or aspirational civil subjects. Today, I choose to look at these artists working at the intersections between Peruvian indigenousness that intersects with brownness and Latinidad in the United States. I want to offer some thoughts to find points of encounters, solidarity, and allyship through performance. Maricarmen Gutiérrez and Germain Machuca embody possibilities for new ways of belonging, to a space, to a community, to a set of affects, from and through the differences that connect us. Now, to situate this talk within the dialogue around intersectional and transnational feminisms, I want to share some images from the last time I was bodily present in a public demonstration, the Women's March in 2020 in Lima, Peru, almost exactly a year ago before we all went sent to lockdown. I was inspired by the confluence of different identities within the Peruvian context. As I was joining the march, I saw women of different backgrounds, ages, and abilities proudly inhabiting their different bodies. I want to know the girl dancing with a person who can be her mother, the group of activists for people with disabilities, and the sweet lady in a wheelchair with a green scarf supporting hashtag Ni Una Menos. Thinking about how different intersections of sociopolitical identities were represented, or better, brought into presence in this march, I saw how working class women, public cleaning workers, and domestic workers marched side by side with middle class women, joining the same chants against patriarchy, walking together, dancing together to the rhythm of drums. I saw young girls from different backgrounds, different experiences of privilege and disenfranchisement, marching together, hoping together for a world where they were safe and thriving. I also saw, and in my case for the first time, a powerful delegation for Black Lives Matter Peru. The banner there, you can read there, las vidas de las mujeres negras importan, el racismo también es violencia. Black women's lives matter, racism is also violence. Which brings me back again to my question about potentialities for solidarity in a transnational landscape, where different histories of racial formations and colonization processes have rendered communities in the here and now that can see themselves as a part of a shared struggle to transform different worlds. Last year's Women's March in Lima was an enactment of intersectional belonging and a reminder that there is no feminism without the acknowledgement of privilege, and no acknowledgement of privilege without looking for forms of solidarity. From this notion of intersectional belonging, I want to focus on brownness as related to indigeneity and Latinidad beyond the limits and geopolitical borders of the Americas and beyond the limitations of white feminism. I want to dialogue with Jose Muñoz's analysis of minoritarian affect, ethnicity as a structure of feeling, and what he calls brown feelings as they emerge in, through, and beside art and performance. I see the performances or acciones that I will share here in this presentation as a part of what Jose Muñoz calls the brown commons, and I quote, "The brown commons is not about the production of the individual, but instead about a movement, a flow, and an impulse to move beyond the singular and individualized subjectivities. It is about the swerve of matter, organic and otherwise, the moment of contact, the encounter, and all that it can generate. Brownness is about contact and is nothing like continuousness. Brownness is a being with, being alongside. The story I am telling about the sense of brown is not about the formation of atomized brown subjects. It is instead about the task, the endeavor, not of enacting a brown commons, but rather about knowing a brownness that is our commonality. Knowing a brownness that is our commonality." End of quote. I propose that different ways of inhabiting brownness open intersectional dialogues as a practice of solidarity and model possibilities for transnational intersectional belonging. So to go briefly, to go back in recent Peruvian history, on Christmas Eve of 2017, thousands of Peruvian citizens took the streets to protest the indulto or pardon that then President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski gave to ex-President Alberto Fujimori, who was in jail for crimes against humanity. So he's in jail right now. Eventually, in October 2018, the pardon was revoked, and lately Fujimori had to return to jail, and Kuczynski had to renounce to his presidency and go to house arrest. This is just one instance of the structural corruption that permeated every aspect of Fujimori's government from 1990 to 2000, and still remain active almost 20 years after the fall of his de facto dictatorship. None of the subsequent governments that promised more transparent and socially progressive agendas was able to counteract this corrosive neoliberal imprint. Within this context, among the many populations affected by the pervasiveness of authoritarian conservative agendas, Peruvian women, especially from racialized, marginalized, and impoverished communities, have faced forced sterilizations, reproductive and sexual right violations, and everyday gender violence. The aftermath of the Fujimorization of Peruvian politics, in particular of the judicial system, can be seen in political corruption in current presidential elections in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. And it's also revealed in the ways in which cases of violence against women are being held. Profitability, pseudo-moralist concerns that reinstate violence by placing the blame in the victim, machismo, trivialization of gender violence through sensationalist media. All of these are a series of practices that were both exacerbated and made evident during the years of Fujimori's government, and that remain ingrained both in macro and micro structures of power. Confronting this systemic violence, the response of the civil societies is shaping intersectional, transnational, and transgenerational feminisms. As we saw in previous images, labor rights, public services, and government accountability are understood as central part of feminist demands right now. Thus, the massive street demonstrations that have gained momentum or had gained momentum before the pandemic have used creative strategies that perform a manifold gesture to protest injustice and violence against women, to denounce feminicidios, and to expose the extensive nature of patriarchal and racist conservativeness that affects the entire society. Along these lines, I want to focus on one specific performance that started as an individual project and became a collective gesture of solidarity. Maricarmen Gutiérrez, Peruvian performer, writer, and director, created this character, Rondera Punk, in 2016 for a performance event organized by the art collective El Galpón Espacio in Lima. The red pollera, skirt, the embroidered hat, and the black scarf that covers her face dialogue with traditional Indian clothes, especially from the region of Cusco. The machete marks the identity of the rondera. The ronderos, ronda campesina, or rural patrols, are community-based security systems that expanded in the 80s for self-defense in the years of Sendero Luminoso's terrorist attacks. And the rondas campesinas are still current, and the term refers in general to volunteering to take care of communities, and in some cases make justice, in places where the official judicial system is non-existent or doesn't work. The leather jacket and the studded resuans, the tachas, bring to the picture the rebellious nature of punk subculture, as well as its non-conformity and anti-authoritarianism. Rondera Punk participated in Acciones de Memoria, actions of memory, that marked her transformation into Rondera Feminista. In dialogue with expansion of feminist struggles, the character loses the top and the leather jacket to present her bare chest as a canvas for the demand Muerte al patriarcado, death to patriarchy, and to show her bleeding nipples as open wounds and testimony of violence against women. A final detail was added lately, the Argentinian green scarf of the Campaña Nacional por el Aborto Legal, Seguro y Gratuito in the hashtag Ni Una Menos movement. This Rondera is not only feminist, she inserts her claim within current transnational feminisms. Rondera Feminista ignited a collective feminist solidarity gesture in November 2018 during the hashtag 25N March, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, November 25. Maricarmen Gutiérrez had arrived to the march donning the clothes of Rondera Feminista with her chest bare. She wasn't part of a big group. The sight of one isolated, semi-naked woman grabbed the attention of the police, and a group of them tried to take her to the police station. As documented by Ana Maria Vidal Carrasco, the reason was because there were children around. It was not the mask, not even the machete. A compañera got to hide it. It was her body freely exposed, what would be intolerable. Now, I have to add that there were other protesters with masks and exposed breasts in this massive march, but all of them were walking in groups. Maricarmen brought her Rondera by herself, and that's why she was targeted. However, when the women marching around noticed that the police were trying to arrest her, they started chanting abusive, repressive police and pointing at them. They started to demand suéltenla, let her go, and opened their path towards Maricarmen, who had been caught at the center of the altercation. Somebody covered her with a shirt, another one embraced her in a protective hug. Putting their bodies as human shields, they finally ran the police out of there while chanting, "You touch one of us, you touch all of us." And que se vayan, get out of here. When the police finally gave up and left, a collective cheer filled the public space. Maricarmen kept marching and joined the chant, "Aquí y allá el miedo se acabó." Here and there, the fear is gone. She then put on the black scarf in her face again, took the shirt off, and kept walking surrounded by women who joined hands to provide a safety cord until the end of the march, echoing the phrase inscribed in the Rondera chest, y va a caer, el patriarcado va a caer, the patriarchy will fall. Maricarmen Gutiérrez, Rondera Feminista, and the impromptu collective performance of protection that she inspired is an example of resistance against atomization. And here's the woman surrounding Maricarmen, and this woman who protected her with her embrace by hugging her. The name of the person who protected Maricarmen with an intense hug is Claudia Arcos. They didn't know each other at that point. Claudia Arcos simply saw a sister who needed protection and put her body in the line of fire to keep Maricarmen safe from the police. I want to read this specific image as the expression of a structure of feeling that is emerging from the transnational feminist protests in times of the conservative turn. Again, I follow Jose Muñoz's reading of Raymond Williams' concept in dialogue with Chicana feminista Norma Alarcón in Feeling Brown. I consider that Maricarmen Gutiérrez set the stage to perform an embodied effort towards relationality, generating, as Jose Muñoz proposes, I quote, a larger collective mapping of self and other, a brown commons. Norma Alarcón's concept of identity and difference understands the structure and role of difference as the underlying concept in a group's mapping of collective identity. End of quote. The embrace that we see here is an expression of sorority between two women who didn't know each other, who hadn't even encountered each other in their differences yet, but that came together because of a common affect, the desire to resist a murderous patriarchal system. Muñoz suggests that the dialogue between Williams and Alarcón and a general turn to affect can help to understand the affiliation and identifications between radicalized and ethnic groups. And I quote, what unites and consolidates oppositional groups is not simply the fact of identity, but the way in which they perform affect, especially in relation to an official national affect that is aligned with a hegemonic class. End of quote. Maricarmen and Claudia share solidarity affects that came from a vulnerable place and became a shared experience of strength. Their embrace and the presence of dozens of bodies around them enact the chant that Marcela Fuentes invoked in Performance Constellation. Together, we are infinite. And I quote Marcela's thoughts on the Argentinian Green Tide, the hashtag Ni Una Menos movement that demanded reproductive rights that also reached Peruvian demonstrations. And I quote, the Green Tide, escarfazos, pañuelazos, and other discursive and bodily performances of collectivity exemplify a feminist understanding of body politics beyond individual, clearly demarcated bodies, such as those fostered by the neoliberal rhetoric of self-improvement, individual effort, and meritocracy. These are forms of furthering and manifesting a becoming collective, that is, constellative dramaturgies in which particular circumstances and needs are not approached as the symptoms of personal shortcomings or mistakes, but of systemic oppression and exploitation. End of quote. So here, Marcela Fuentes, Jose Muñoz, and both coming from different places, are signaling the necessity to see ourselves beyond our own individualities and find ourselves in each other coming from our differences. It's the acknowledgement of our differences that can ignite solidarity. The idea of becoming collective contrasts with another feature of the Fujimorization of Peruvian everyday life, the very concept of the trickle-down neoliberal economics. The now ingrained idea of a supposed ripple effect might be one of the causes for the passivity of civil society. I found a different response in contemporary feminist movements and the concept of sorority. Transnational networks of resistance do not wait for a trickle down or a ripple effect. They enact the effects and affects of their political performances. Networks are tejidos, tissues, fabric, textures, where every thread has a sense of being and opens the path for the next thread. This is a tejido vivo, a live fabric, where the actors involved take charge of the changes and expansion of the network. Basically, this is the very center of what performance can do in activism. This is the action that is creating these effects, and it's the understanding of communication and connection through the performance of specific acts of connection. See, yes. After the hashtag 25 and March, Maricarmen asked through social media who the compa de lentes, comrade in glasses, Claudia Arcos was, and they found each other. They became friends, and Claudia Arcos takes pictures of Rondera Feminista anytime they met in a march. In March 8, 2019, 2 years ago, during the hashtag HM March, Rondera Feminista didn't go alone. She was accompanied by another compa in a skirt and a bare chest, Lili Albornoz. Claudia Arcos took this picture of both of them. Rondera Feminista has become an icon for the feminist movements in Peru. Rondera stands alone, but in community, as a collective effect and affect of resistance emerges in the encounter of this woman. Maricarmen Gutiérrez is still receiving emails from women who thank her for what she did and for the inspiration that she brought to them and their daughters. Seeing both Maricarmen Gutiérrez and Lili Albornoz together, choosing to embrace their brownness as a form of resistance, reminds us that first, when art and activism converge, the effectiveness of an action intertwines with the effectiveness of a collective response. As Stephen Duncombe and Ricardo Dominguez reflect on the concept and practice of artivism, they propose that the very notion of something being effective or getting results is linked to activism. So activist movements want to get something, a result. They have specific demands, whereas artistic practices move away from any practical goals. Artivism articulates effects and affects and inserts action into different temporalities. It's not about what can be achieved specifically in one moment, but what kind of networks of solidarity resistance can emerge from this convergence between art and activism. As Mexican artivist Jesusa Rodriguez would say, this is a work that has been done sin prisa, pero sin pausa. Not in a hurry, but without pausing. That is the connection between art and activism, or one of the connections that can be found between art and activism. The second idea that comes to my mind when we see this gesture of solidarity, the one that that protected Maricarmen, but also later Lili Albornoz going with Maricarmen Gutiérrez so that they wouldn't go to a march alone again, is the gesture of, it relates to the idea of performance and action as well. This is a reminder that feminism is a practice, not an ideology or a given set of thoughts. Thinking about feminism, specifically transnational and intersectional feminisms, as a practice is thinking about them as a doing, right? And this brings the possibilities for transformation, both socially and individually, thus moving away from the limits of white feminism. It goes beyond specific identities. It is a process of learning, unlearning, doing and redoing. So you don't need to be white to be a white supremacist, as the leader of the infamous Proud Boys has demonstrated, right? So brownness can also carry racism, as racist practices can come from any body, and brown bodies can perform discrimination and racial violence. But in the same way, the opposite is also possible. Being white doesn't necessarily make you a white feminist, right? Independently of individual identities, it is possible to become an intersectional feminist in a constant process of doing, learning, and unlearning. It's a practice, it's a doing, a constant process of becoming, embracing possibilities for dialogue and solidarity. So feminism is not linked to skin color, it's linked to choosing to perform specific actions in specific contexts. Now, I've been talking for like half an hour. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second. Okay, so I've been talking for a while right now. So I want to move away from this idea of just I'm going to dump information on you and just want to check in how we're doing. So if you would like to, please go ahead in the chat and just write in one word, okay, what kind of affects the performance of solidarity that you have seen provoking you. I would appreciate it. So just one word of how you feeling right now, what are you seeing right now, what kind of ideas and affects are going through your own experiences in this moment. Just a check-in, quick check-in. How you doing? Empathy. Yes, thank you. Empathy. Hope. Yes. Indignation. Yes. Determined. Solidarity. Rage. Sadness. Inspired. Unity. Encouraged. Yes. Togetherness. Ambition. Yes. Surprised. Family. For sure. Sincerity. Yes. Thank you. Truth. Actually, if I start reading this poem, empathy, hope, indignation, determined, solidarity, rage, sadness, inspired, unity, encouraged, togetherness, ambition, surprised, family, sincerity, truth, sincerity, solidarity, perspective. Thank you. This makes me feel like we are here together in a dialogue. I love this. And it's also a way to find our own connections with what we are seeing. The fact of performing a specific way of being in the world is linked to looking at ourselves, making choices, and find those paths to empathy, as the first person who commented said. Love that. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go to the second part of my presentation. Okay. So in the second part of the presentation, I want to share a piece of work by Chola drag extraordinaire Germain Machuca. Germain's work for LGBTQ plus rights through performance and activism is a wonderful example of the gesture of exceeding their own body and racialization by embracing it. Their body is another cipher of thousands of bodies, male, female, non-binary, racialized, that were targeted by Fujimori's neoliberalism and before and beyond as well. Consequential with her early 80s and 90s activism for LGBTQ plus rights that demands more human politics of care towards communities with HIV/AIDS, Germain has joined protests against Peruvian state violence that is performed against the most vulnerable populations, indigenous, racialized, marginalized, queer, precarious bodies. Germain has lent their body to public protests and marches for reproductive and sexual rights, demanded to hold politicians accountable for their siege on their own fellow citizens in a country that hasn't been able to offer alternatives to leonine neoliberal politics. They have protested against conservative social politics that render marginalized bodies, her own body, as disposable. In dialogue with Transnational Feminism's Acciones, focused, brief, and intense interventions in public spaces, Germain engages with academic artivist approaches that imagine new modes of coexistence. As a response to traumatic processes of neocolonial control over bodies, pleasures, and desires of marginalized individualities and collectivities, Germain's trans feminist and queer resistances remap affective ties. Their body carries the wounds of the blow we all suffered collectively. And this new cartography of embodied affect acknowledges the centrality of race and racialized bodies that are both subject of violence and the source of liberation. Germain carries within the bodies that were and will be. In October 2017, Germain went to the streets embodying a mutant, mobile, and collective chola drag. It is impossible not to look at her face, her shaved head done in an Indian hat, her big eyes with even bigger eyelashes and neon shades and lipstick, enormous heart-shaped silver earrings, rival with the beauty of an Indian chuncha mask that she carries on her hands as her reflection of or her double. A purple cape and miniskirt held together by a simple white robe would remind us of modest Catholic robes, if it wasn't for the long legs that it revealed, barely covered by a sexy knitted pantyhose that ended in two neon pink fierce high platform shoes. Walking the streets of Lima being this fantabulous was already a powerful way to regendering a city and a country in crisis. But the Acción, called Marica País, intends more. It questions the branding of Peru as a country supposedly ready to celebrate the bicentennial of its independence when its people were being killed, tortured, or just left to die of abandonment and social indifference. When Germain opens her robe, she shows her body. Her body becomes graffiti. In collaboration with graphic artist Aliender Espada Camones and Carga Máxima, and activists Alonso Giovanni Rivas Ávalo, Susana Torres, Sofía Caterina Durán, Azucena del Carmen, and Lili Albornoz, who is here as well. I love that Lili Albornoz is in both public performances. Neon words cover her chest, arms, and legs. Words like marica, traca, cabro, maricón, fallado, sodomita reclaim the use of insults and slurs as war's wounds, as a live canvas, and as a performative map of survival and resistance. The text that accompanies the action reads, this is my translation of Germain's wonderful writing. It's bad translation, it's fantastic. Graffiti travesti that recovers and exhibits the bodies not included in the erased murals. Calligraphy that deactivates the insult to give it back as luminous tattoo. Make-up that shines its neon lettering of toxic and reactive fluorescence. Scribble that is the signature of its dissidence's fingerprint. Waterproofed and Marica sticker that counteracts the standardizing typography of normativity and consumerism. Protection charm, badge, and banner as imprint and announcement of a silk serial screen print war. The non-negotiable marks of a feverish body in resistance. Flash. The writing in Spanish is just amazing. English it is still fantastic because Germain is fantastic. With this action of one of many, Germain's body is both a site of resistance and source of knowledge. It is both a career of political memories and a collective canvas where her friends and collaborators write their, our history. It is both a map for action and a no place of utopian encounters. Above all, it is the cipher of demands for political recognition. It is the bruja visionaria, the seer who demands to be seen. And she's never alone. Her friends are with her, and also the thousands of bodies that march in the streets that year, today, and the millions of bodies that will not be able to march or to protest anymore. In dialogue with the rise of #Menos protests in Latin America, Germain's body might be screaming, together we are infinite, as Marcela Fuentes reminded us. And like Maricarmen, being protected by the embrace of her sisters, Germain exceeds their own body and becomes collective. These collective transformative forces had to move from the streets to the digital space with the spread of COVID-19. So the title of this talk is Racialized Bodies in the Streets. I've been following marches, being in marches, and thinking about the potential, political potential of bodies in the streets, and then we're in lockdown. There are still marches right now, but it's important to think about how this pandemic is transforming the presences of bodies in the streets, and how we can think about digital avenues as well as sites of protests. So by the end of 2019, Germain was working on a hybrid project of live and audiovisual performance. In 2020, Pachacabrilla, Cuerpos en Prosección, evolved into a fragmented, scattered visual performance that asks what bodies deserve to be held and taken into procession. The initial idea for this performance echoed ongoing concerns around HIV/AIDS precarity, focusing on the ill body, a fragile body in emergency. The character Pachacabrilla would ask, what bodies deserve the dignity of the patient, of being treated as a patient? A question that became even more relevant in times of COVID-19, a recurrent nightmare about the fair survival of rejected bodies, and the fact that doctors now have to choose what lives to save, right? Because of the lack of emergency rooms and respirators. Germain is aware that this new pandemic could be seen as an extension of the previous one, which calls for the cancellation of the old order and the debunk of the myth of neoliberal well-being. There should be no back to normal, because normalcy is the infection. And Germain's performance refuses that deceptive normalcy, functioning as a space that is never under control, that always responds to a new version of historical events. The very notion of prosección, a game of words between procession and promsex, a Peruvian feminist NGO for sexual and reproductive rights, encrypts the historic connections between colonial systems of oppression and the erasure of queer acts of sexual resistance that were deemed as dangerous, execrable, and disposable. But the procession is not only linked to the Catholic pilgrimage to accompany saints and virgins. It also goes back to the rituals of embellished pre-Hispanic mummies with their best garments and jewelry to prepare their triumphant entrance to the underworld. Machuca, Germain's niece, remembers that as a child in the late 80s and 90s, Germain took care of many of her friends who died of AIDS, thus creating, and I quote Malu, creating a sense of devotion and healing that I believe to be central to the identity of Travesti as curandera, end of quote, as a healer. Germain's procession, then intends both to heal and to embrace death, to carry on their dead and to celebrate life, those lives that are not only neglected but also besieged by Peruvian necropolitics. On November 18, 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, Germain participated in Latino America Performance, a transnational virtual performance festival. The Peruvian delegation encompassed its performances under the title Perú, Necropolíticas de Cuerpos en Abandono. Peru, Necropolitics of Bodies in Abandonment. The title of Germain's video performance, Fantasma Alegórica, Escarapela, Apósitos Patrios, offers another game of words between Phantasmagorica, a shamanic character, and the allegory of a country in need of healing. And with the Escarapela or cockade that is here, this is the Peruvian Escarapela, el cockade, that is white, red and white. With the Escarapela or cockade, as a nationalistic symbol and apósitos or medical ghosts to heal the bodies that are hurt by the same nation that they are impelled to revere. Fantasma Alegórica has the soundtrack of a loud martial band music that invokes the patriotism that is shoveled on Peruvian throats since childhood and transforms the red and white national colors of the Escarapela into a pink and white nightmarish hypnotic spiral. Beneath that spiral, the body of Pachacabrilla, Phantasmagorica, Germain lays down semi-naked, pinned with a scarapella that marks labels, inscribes her body as an excess of the national project. This body is multiple. She's both a travesti shamana in trance. She's both a scapegoat and a sacrifice lamb, body both in abandonment and in the act of transforming national discourses into art and resistance. The image of Pachacabrilla being at the sacrificial altar echoes one of Germain's live performances back in 2008, where she lays down half tied up and half in bondage, dressed just in underwear and black high heels, surrounded by ceremonial lit candles. The image takes us to a no place where her chola body is precariously sexual, vulnerably powerful, not alone. In Fantasma Alegórica, however, it is impossible not to refer to the new virus that threatens our bodies. Along with the martial bound sound, the pink-white spiral, and Phantasmagorica's body in trance, we hear a heavy panting that moves away from the erotic to invoke the respiratory difficulties and the overarching exhaustion generated by COVID-19. Germain letters his video as a cyanotic trance turned into ecstasy to recover desire. The suffocation, the lack of oxygen crosses the screen and touch upon the thousands of bodies we have lost to the pandemic. Germain Machuca continuously challenges queer domesticity and commodification by impregnating their performances with a multi-layered affective explosion, by queering national symbols and so touching the untouchable, by underlining the unsolved struggles on class, gender, and race that cannot be separated from a so-called Peruvianness at portals of the bicentennial celebration of the independence wars. In this manner, they place themselves in the middle of broader discussion about the affects of neoliberalism and post-neocolonial political and social structures. The struggle continues, the work does not stop, and Germain keeps performing from, through, and for her body instrument, always dignified, never undignified. Siempre digna, nunca indigna. I chose to share Germain's work today as another entrance to the notion and practice of intersectional belonging. If the limitations of white feminism emerged from centering gender, forgetting other intersections, then the practice of transnational and intersectional feminisms offers alternatives for solidarity, for the fluid interaction within and between identities, for the decision of opening spaces, for the decision of living spaces, or creating spaces of belonging, the decision to be present. As Diana Taylor proposes, and I quote, present, presente, simultaneously singular and plural in both languages, English and Spanish, conveys the ontological condition that one is, we are never fully present alone, and plurality always entails singularity. We exist in states of besideness and betweenness. We all appear to others, and others appear to us. End of quote. Being present for each other in the midst of violence and death, to protect each other, to embrace togetherness in difference, to belong together in difference. So if transnational and intersectional feminisms are not about skin color, but about practices of solidarity and resistance, the question that I want to offer today is, how do you choose to perform your feminism? And I leave this question open for dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robles Moreno, for sharing such a rich research, insightful um, pictures and thoughts, and a really, really revelatory content for us to process and to apply to situations that we might be experiencing today. This has been a fantastic presentation. I wanted to invite everyone to complete a survey that we use for the race talks, and I put that on the chat. So if you would like to go to that link at the end of the talk and complete the survey, these are voluntary and absolutely anonymous surveys. That would be much appreciated. I also would like to open discussions if you would like to answer some of the questions. If you have questions that you would like to post on the chat, please be free or feel free to do so right now. And I was really touched by this idea of belonging in difference that you present today. Um, I had these questions about activism. You answered those ones really clearly, and the connection between activism and art, and how we really try to perform an idea, to affect you, to produce a change in our society. Particularly thoughtful, I found these last sentences that you brought to us about how are we going to do that. The idea that we belong in front and with others, that we are always inhabiting our bodies in a way that we haven't chose, right? And so that we have that responsibility to carry about ourselves and about others, and how every action that we do, we engage with, it affects others too. So I thought that was such a wonderful insight for us to think about. And we may not have all the responses right now to articulate, because those are deep questions that demand from all of us to really, really talk to ourselves, right? To really experience the world around us. And well, that was something really, really inspiring for me. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Good. So there's a couple of questions coming up right here from Denise. Um,
Yes.
you can see the chat there. Would you like to read
Actually, yes.
directly?
I
Okay.
found Germain Machuca's ability to use her body as a vehicle was much more powerful than words. It's a very poignant thought, because thank you, Denise Mayer. It's interesting because Germain is a great writer, right? And actually the role of words within this conversation is very important, because I like to think in a possibility of intersecting art, activism, academia, right? So Germain is also a wonderful thinker, and the way to express the thoughts and those knowledges are both through her body and her words. And what Denise is pointing out is interesting, because where is that power coming from, right? And how do we access to the effects of those powerful statements? So for some people, watching the images that Germain shares, or live performances, or her writing, right? Those are different fronts from where we can access to what Germain is proposing about rights for everyone and connections, to demand, a better treatment of racialized, sexualized, colonized bodies. Yes. But it's interesting to mention what is that talks to us the most. And I think the most powerful artists are the ones that can move in between languages and formats and possibilities. Yes. The neon lettering was really cool and had many instruments also headed. Yes, yes, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot as well, with the use of the term chola, because chola is a racial insult that is being normalized in Peru, and is now being reclaimed, as a way of, okay, yes, chola, so what? No, as Victoria Santa Cruz many years ago did as well, right, with blackness, Peruvian blackness. And yes, it's to take the insult and to give it back as a way of empowerment, right? And to say, well, if I take this as my word, is a way to respond to that. And yes, Ernest is a scholar too, Machuca. Yes, I think this is in Northwestern. Yes, yes, Malu's in Northwestern. Yeah. And also, this is another example of the convergence, intersections between art, activism, academia, right? Because Malu is Germain's niece, but also is a collaborator and a witness of the different performances and transformations that Germain has been able to perform throughout the years, right? So now that Malu is in Northwestern, working on this idea of the Germain and other artists as healers, as the one who are here to contain, to support, and to bring communion in the after death, not the afterlife, but the after death of many losses. It's another instance of what can be done if these dialogues start to happen, right? It's easier to find the blockage than say, well, no, I work on art. I'm an artist. I'm not a political person, right? Or I, in my own box of whatever I do, and I specialize, right? What are the possibilities for intersections and transversality in the different aspects of our lives? Not only in feminisms, right, but also in academic fields, right, in the way that we work in our everyday life and identities. It's, I think, with COVID, one thing that is, it was pre-COVID, but it's also, to me, is getting clearer in the almost after COVID times, hopefully. This idea of fluidity, right? Not being fixed to one specific set of expectations as something that can help offer paths for survival, right? It's like not being kind of grounded and saying, this is what I am, and this is what I do, right? And closing that is what could have brought lots of deaths these times. Now, the possibility for openness, for moving around, to saying, okay, I have to adapt and see other ways of being and other ways of being with, is what can come in the aftermath, hopefully, because also the individualism is just too ingrained in, I think, human nature right now.
I think that's when we talk about listening to different perspectives, right? It's not just about listening, but when we actively listen, it demands from us to be flexible in the way that we position ourselves. And so that's when I hear you say, not have rigid concepts, but rather being able to understand others and uh, to kind of have that flexibility of approach,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily threatening our positions, but opening up to uh, allow for others to occupy different spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's a very important concept that we got from your talk today. I was wondering, you mentioned about exploring outside academia, right? Just erasing the boundaries of the academic world. We know that as scholars, there is just a way of being in academia and scholarship. And I see your research really exploring beyond those boundaries. So what has brought you to this point? What kind of interest in the past decade or 2 decades have brought you to intersectionality and to this type of very thought-provoking research?
Performance studies, for sure, because um, it's an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field of studies, right? And also, it's not only that it's open to different perspectives and kind of tunes in different ways or lenses or analytical lenses, but also because it invites different ways for collaboration, right? So I remember in my master's degrees, one of my first classes in performance studies with Jose Munoz, I asked him, so you're always writing on the work of artists who are live and that you hang out with, right? So why? I was sincerely curious about that. And I mean, his response was great as well, because I do believe that there is this uh, going back and forth between academia and art, right? Is whatever I write, I share with my artistic collaborators, and they are also creating these new knowledges and new thoughts, right? So, for example, I'm very close with Maricarmen and Germain. I admire them, I respect them, but I'm also always following them and talking with them about their work. So it's this back and forth that creates new ways of thinking. And I want to think about that, about another space for fluidity, like not saying, okay, it's me, my work, my computer, and my books, and I do my research here, but it's the bringing also my body to those places and my affective ties as well, because there's a lot of love in what I do. Is admiration, respect, and love towards them.
There is another couple of questions. One
Yeah, there are a lot of questions.
from Natalia. Can you comment on how the exposed women's body in the Andean clothing and the Andean clothing convey conflicting effects for Peruvian, still very conservative society, considering also that these performances are seen by people outside the march? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you, Natalia. Yes, and the out of context, right? It's like what do people do with a semi-naked female body out of the context of the protest, and how they choose. This is important. This is they choose to read that, right? Um, So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about anti-feminism. I was thinking about toxic masculinities. I mean, all the other side of the possibilities for solidarity, right? And the possibilities for connection in spaces where actual violence keep happening. So how to react and how to comment on that, right? And the fact that Maricarmen's performance can also ignite violent and racist responses. It's like, okay, so this woman, and using the chola insult against her as well because of the Indian clothing that Natalia is mentioning, right? So I the people who react that way, right? Uh, I think that is another system. They're kind of living in a different system of connections, right? And that doesn't that shouldn't be affecting the possibilities for solidarity and connection that is brought by art and activism within the movement, right? Um, I I choose to believe that those reactions and those racist comments on an action that is very powerful and inspiring are going to happen all the time, because this conservative society of Peru and racist society is not going to be changed from one day to the other, right? As Jesusa was saying, sin, this is going to change very slowly. No, sin prisa, pero sin pausa. No, it's not in a hurry, but non-stopping. So the comments are there, they're going to be there all the time. The decontextualization of a powerful action is going to happen, right? And I think there's nothing to do about that, right? There's not much to do with the misuse of social media and the replication of images without context, and as an excuse for more violence, right? I think the opposite would be terrible, not to do anything so that those responses don't happen, right? They know that they are exposed and they are putting their bodies in the front lines at risk. And being at the front lines implies to be taken out of context and attacked again. And all of these artists and their collaborators and many people have chosen to do it anyway, right? Have chosen to embrace that risk and do it because of the need for transformation. Right. So I don't know if Natalia's question went towards that specifically, but basically the affective, the negative, the bad affects that can come are going to happen all the time, and it's part of the risk.
Thank you. And here's another question from Dr. Leonardo Cardoso. He's a faculty in the Department of Performance Studies. She mentions a Museo Travesti del Peru.
Yes, thank you for that question. Thank you very much. So Germain has had collaborated with Giuseppe Campuzano, who was a wonderful, also drag extraordinaire thinker, doer, philosopher, artist, activist. He was just fantastic, and actually Giuseppe passed away in 2013, almost a month of difference with Jose Munoz as well. So one thing about the Museo Travesti that was Giuseppe's project, but Germain was involved as well in that project because they were close collaborators, was to revisit the history of Peru, the pre-Hispanic history as well, and to map out travestism, and homosexuality as something that is not at the margins of the history of Peru, but bringing it to the center of the history of Peru, thus rereading and rewriting Peruvian history through travestism, right? And that project is, I mean, it's absolute, yes, it's fascinating. It's a project that started 2008, if I'm not mistaken. So it was first an intervention, like an installation, then it became a book. It went to different places also outside of Peru. And the year that Giuseppe passed away, months before she passed away, there was one last performance between Giuseppe and Germain that it was called the Two Fridas, speaking to the two Fridas, Frida Kahlo's Two Fridas, but also the Two Fridas of Las Yeguas del Apocalipsis. It's a Chilean performance duet. And in that performance, Germain and Giuseppe were mirroring each other as the two halves of Frida, right? And they were connected by a tubes, blood tubes that Germain helped Giuseppe to cut. So in that performance installation that was in dialogue with the Museo Travesti, you can see there's a video. If you find it, if you look for it, it's in Vimeo. Giuseppe leaves, after they have cut severe the life sustained, basically, and Germain remains in the art gallery. And the day that Giuseppe passed away, Germain was in the funeral procession dressed as the other half of Frida. So while Giuseppe left, this other half remains. So they're amazing. It's very difficult to talk about Germain's work without those echoes of Giuseppe. So I thank you very much for that question, because they were quite an artistic collaborator, kind of powerful force.
Beautiful, thank you. That's beautiful, beautiful performance.
Yes,
Poetry.
yes.
I have the last one, also from Dr. Cardoso. This is the last one we can take. So, and I think he's referring to a paper that you wrote about abject performance.
Yes, that is the wonderful and amazing Leticia Alvarado's book that is called Abject Performances. And Leticia Alvarado's concept of abject performances is actually in dialogue with the performance, with the graffiti, and taking the insult and giving it back as a form of empowering, because abject performances refers to Latinidad in the US. And instead of trying to fit, to clean up Latinidad and brownness to fit into the national affect of whiteness of the United States, it's embracing abjection, embracing the whatever insult, whatever expectation of abject brownness that has been imposed on Latinx communities, and give it back through art and performance. So it's the embracing of abjection as a way of empowering, and to be in dialogue with Germain to give it back to that whiteness, that pervasive whiteness that wants to push down Latinx and Latinidad. The book is amazing. If you can read it, it's Abject Performances by Leticia Alvarado. It's fantastic. She's mi tocaya, and so we share the name, but she's fantastic, and I'm Leticia. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think we need to wrap up our our
Yes.
our talk today. So I will thank you so much for the gift of your presence and sharing your research with us. We all feel much richer after the talk today. And thank you everyone for attending the talk. And if you would like to stay in for a little bit longer, I will stop the recording and hang out in here.